Hello, one and all. Bienvenue à tous. If you're tuning in live, thanks for making the time for us in your busy day. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. Whichever way you're joining us, welcome to Postmedia's 5th season of Driving into the Future. Today, the subject we're talking about will be data security in automobiles. I'm David Booth, senior writer for Driving.ca, and your host for today's panel. Today's discussion deals with perhaps the most ignored subject in our industry, cybersecurity in automobiles. So sit yourself down, shut off the TV, grab yourself a cup of coffee because we're going for a deep dive into the software-defined vehicle and the hundreds of computers that now drive them. You'll find out how much ransomware is costing us, why the next frontier for car hacking may be hardware rather than software. And apologies ahead of time, you're going to find out more about application programming interfaces than you ever thought you wanted to know. Seriously, this last is important because it could be the difference between your car being in the driveway tomorrow morning or on its way to Kazakhstan in a conveniently mismarked shipping container. Helping me decipher this complicated and underreported issue is a truly well-wired panel of experts. First up, we have ethical hacker Sam Curry, a security engineer at Yuga Labs, who recently hacked into, well, pretty much every car brand on the planet. Next, we have Yoav Levy, CEO and co-founder of Upstream Security, which provides cloud-based cyber defense for a diverse lineup of automakers. And finally, we have Sebastian Fischmeister, an electrical and computer engineering professor at University of Waterloo, who specializes in the cybersecurity of automobiles and who's currently researching a way for all companies, automakers included, to quickly and cheaply test their computer chips for forgeries. So thanks a lot for joining us today, gentlemen. As I said, I think this is one of the most ignored stories in the automotive world. And I got to admit that I'm personally keenly interested in the discussion today because, like a lot of people, even industry insiders, I don't know nearly enough about this important subject. Just one last thing before we get started. Let me welcome all our viewers and remind everyone that this dialogue is made possible with support from Toyota. Yoav, let's jump right into this. Can you tell us what your company Upstream does and why it's so important? What exactly are cyber threats? Who's perpetuating them? And how do we stop them from becoming an even bigger problem than they already are?
Yeah. So thank you very much first for having me in this conversation. So when we started Upstream 6 years ago, we started it with a vision to secure the connected vehicle ecosystem. When we looked at connected vehicles, so we look at very complex machines. Many people are saying computer on wheels, 100 million lines of code, ECUs like computers, sensors, cameras, network, and the car is connected to the cloud. So the car can do a software update, and there is also applications that are connected to the car. So connected devices and connected cars need to have security in place to make sure that the car cannot be hacked. So what Upstream does, we build the cybersecurity cloud-based detection and response platform that help to detect in close to real-time threats and respond to these threats. So we actually help the car manufacturers to secure their connected vehicles against cyber threats. So you ask about what are the cyber threats that we see, or what are the risks car manufacturers have, and maybe if I'll try to summarize it into different areas. So first is stealing data or ransomware data. I think this is all across the IT industry. Same goes to the connected vehicles. There are a lot of personal information in this data, a lot of sensitive data, customer data that many of the hackers wants to steal ransomware. The other areas are related to, for example, stealing cars. So if you look back 20, 30 years ago, you need to connect the wires to steal cars. Today, there are cybersecurity tools that helps the thieves actually to steal cars without breaking the window or connecting the wires together. And the other area that potentially could happen are actually safety risk. So taking use cases like someone remotely able to control your car, and we see a few demonstrations of this happening in the past, that could also introduce a certain level of risk. So looking at fraud activities, safety and privacy and data theft, this is kind of the areas we see cyber threats and risks.
So when you're detecting these risks and preventing them and everything else, is it all computer controlled, or is there still a human element? Is there like a man at the end of the process saying this is a problem, this isn't? Is there still some human detective work done in this as well?
So most of the way cars are connected to the cloud, so it's a lot of machine-to-machine communication. So the cars are sending telemetry data to the cloud. There are different protocols, different ways to communicate, to connect between the cars and the cloud, and from the application using APIs. So most of the cases are not related to humans. It's more like how hackers can find vulnerabilities in the architecture in different level, if it's in the API level, if it's in the cloud, or if someone physically try to hack the cloud through the diagnostic port. Each one of them requires a different set of security protection, and but most of it are not related to a human there.
Thanks very much. Sam, thanks very much. Yoav, Sam, you're in the same business, but you attack this from a completely different angle, don't you? Yoav's playing defense, you're playing offense. An ethical hacker is someone pretending to be a bad guy and exposing weaknesses in cybersecurity systems so companies and systems can learn from them, I think. But how did you determine to get into cars? Why did you get into cars? I read your blog, and there was something about a late night with some electric scooters. How did that work, and why did that inspire you?
Yeah, so it's actually funny. I was on a college campus with a few of my friends who are also into cybersecurity, and it was probably like 2 a.m. You know, a couple of them probably drinking or something. But we were wandering around, and we found these electric scooters, and we rode about a mile on these things to get back to the dorm. And we realized that in order to like use the electric scooter, you connect it to an app, and the app connected the scooter, and it could do a bunch of stuff like make the lights flash or the horn honk. And we thought it'd be really funny to like find some way to like trigger that remotely. So we dragged this scooter up to our dorm room, and we pushed it on the wall, and we all got our laptops out. And we began like looking at the network traffic for the scooter. And eventually we tested it for a while, and we found this vulnerability where we could trigger all the scooters in the vicinity to beep at the same time. So we open the glass door on the window, and we walk up to the deck, and we click the button to do it. And across the whole college campus, there's just like hundreds of scooters just, you know, flashing and like making noises. And like we felt so like there's so much power, you know, right? And we thought about it for a while, and we thought like, well, what about like connected cars? Because I have like a connected vehicle, it's pretty much the same technology, right? Like you have the phone app, and then you have the car, the vehicle, and you can do things like unlock it, flash the lights, or even like open the trunk or whatever. So we kind of thought about it for a while, and we thought it'd be like a really fun, you know, experiment to spend a few months trying to hack like different connected vehicles. So that's kind of like my start for getting into car security.
Okay, so you started with something small, you've moved on to something bigger and faster, obviously. How do you expose such weaknesses without overwhelming us with talks of bits and bytes? What is it you do to gain access? Can you give us sort of a short white hacker's guide to the galaxy?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of security researchers prefer like the physical bit where they're next to a car and they're doing some complicated cryptographic thing to unlock the door physically. But we wanted to go at it from the angle of, you know, if I'm a consumer and I own a vehicle, there's the app that connects to my vehicle. And we thought about it for a while, and we we're just like, well, what happens if we spend a lot of time trying to break the actual app that connects to vehicles. Because if you're able to find vulnerabilities in the actual app and the actual systems that talk to the vehicle, then you could essentially take over every car that uses that platform. So we focused specifically on that. We basically began kind of breaking the app open, like seeing what traffic was happening, and then seeing if we could find vulnerabilities there.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Thanks again. Sebastian, so far Yoav and Sam have discussed over-the-air attacks on software, the programming that runs our cars. But your research focused on something completely different. You're worried, if I get this right, that the hardware, the chips that run all the computers in our cars could be compromised. How does that work? And why don't you walk us through what types of counterfeit chips there are and where they come from?
Yes, so also thank you for having me. Fundamentally, all the software that we execute and that runs and drives our vehicles runs on top of hardware. And of course, it's not only that the software that can be compromised in order to then do actions that are either unsafe or unintended. It's also you can also go one step below that and basically attack the hardware and have the hardware perform actions or not perform actions to then cause, for example, safety or security problems. And at the moment, a lot of people concentrate on the software side, but actually on the hardware side, similar attacks are possible, whether they are either financially motivated or maliciously motivated that you actually want to harm something. Both of them are possible. But what you mentioned with the counterfeit is that that's basically a financially motivated type of attack on these systems where somebody in the supply chain wants to basically make a quick buck or basically wants to improve the margin and thereby replaces an original chip from the original manufacturer either with a clone or, for example, a recycled and reclaimed chip. And to give you an idea how that works or how, for example, the counterfeit element works is at the moment, we send all our or a lot of our e-waste to other countries, to another location to basically dispose it. Now, at that location, they not necessarily just put it on a big trash pile. They desolder components to basically reclaim electronics and reclaim materials from these electronics. Now, since some of these electronics might still be working, they also want to make money and then sell them to other countries, to other locations where buyers buy these used electronics, clean them, and then afterwards reintroduce them into the supply chain. And especially with chips that might be either more on the component side and more on the simpler side of the electronics, like microcontrollers, or chips that are hard to source, that's where you can make money. And basically these chips that get then reintroduced into the supply chain, and your brand new car might actually have chips that are not new and thereby don't behave as the safety analysts that designed the systems think that they would behave. Okay,
so I guess if I'm understanding, the ones that we're seeing now are just recycled or remarked cheaper ones. Could we see a chip that was deliberately doctored to do something the more that was asked? Or is there a way to piggyback a chip on a microprocessor, if you will, so that it does something that the end user doesn't have? Is that kind of thing possible?
Absolutely. I mean, that already has been shown in research in many instances that you can embed functionality and logic inside a chip and then have it activated under certain circumstances, or have even time delayed actions that are only activated after a certain amount of time. Other types of attacks could be, for example, to manipulate the chips in such a way that the lifetime of the chip is not what you expected originally when you tested the chip. And so whatever system you use this chip in will fail much sooner than anticipated. So there is a lot of options that you have if you want to attack at the chip level and at the electronics level. And of course, they have been shown already in research papers and results that this is possible.
Well, I mean, software is getting all the attention right now, but it sounds from what you're saying that we should be paying a little bit more attention to the hardware. Thanks very much. Yoav, this is the complication I mentioned at the beginning of the story when I said viewer beware. What the heck is an API, the application programming interface that I mentioned earlier? Other than the fact that they're the new prime weakness in the automotive cyber wars, I really don't know anything about them. Can you tell us what they are and why they make our cars so vulnerable? In small words, please, Yoav. Some of us can barely operate an iPhone.
Good question. So yeah, so API are being used to connect between two different software. So if I'll give you an example, let's say that you have a Facebook app on your mobile phone, and you want to post something on your social, that your app is using APIs that are communicating with Facebook. So your post will be added into the Facebook databases. So essentially, APIs helps to connect between two applications two software that allows to change or configure or communicates between the software. So, and you ask like why APIs are so vulnerable in connected vehicles, and maybe I'll start by saying that at least the way I know, like bad actors or hackers that are cyber criminal, they're very focused on ROI and how to make money. So they're saying like, what is the easiest way for them to make money with the less investment, and they can see like the best ROI. They are like a P&L organization, right? So they want to make money, and they're looking for the weakest link in order to hack something and make money. For example, in connected vehicle, that could be stealing data, ransomware data, disrupting service, could be performing fraud activities, stealing vehicles, etc. And they're looking at what is the easiest way for me to do it? How can I replicate it on all the different targets that I have without adding too much effort, right? So when you look at connected vehicles and you look at the different layers, so you can hack the hardware inside the vehicle, you need to be an expert on chipset, and an engineer. You need to understand the architecture of the vehicle per model. It's very complex. And then when you are able to do that, you need to invest in a new model, a different architecture. So the ROI is not that good. When you look at APIs, which is pretty common layer, most of the car companies are using APIs. Some of them are actually open to third parties to build their own application. For example, if you are an insurance company and you want to offer usage-based insurance or pay how you drive application, you can use the car manufacturer's APIs to build this logic and application. So it means that vulnerabilities in the API layer could probably be the weakest link in order to hack cars, hack it in scale, and by the way, not only for connected cars, for many other industries. So I think this is why it's very important to secure the three layers, but the APIs probably would be the weakest link in this architecture.
Just to wrap it up, would it be safe to say that API is part of the communication systems between apps and the car, roughly? Am I far off with that?
Yeah, between, let's say that you have a mobile app that is your consumer connected app, connected car application. So this is how your mobile phone and application are communicating with your cars eventually.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Sam, Yoav has talked a little bit about the vulnerabilities. You're the guy that exposes vulnerabilities. Your recent hacking escapades had some pretty big scalps on it. Can you walk us through which cars you were able to hack, what you did to them, and how difficult on a professional hacker scale they were to get into? Were there any cars you couldn't, for instance, hack?
Yeah, sure. So there were probably about like 13, 14 different car companies. So it's going to be a little bit of like redundancy, or weird to say it, but like for like Kia, Honda, Infiniti, Nissan, Acura, Hyundai, Genesis, we were basically able to take a VIN number or an email address, plug it into vulnerable APIs, and essentially unlock, start, open the trunks of, or sometimes even view the live cameras of these vehicles. So it was a wide scale thing. The joke I always tell people, right, is if you were to walk through like a Trader Joe or like a expensive grocery store's like parking lot, it's probably 70% of the cars in the parking lot. You could have gone up to the windshield, and through the exploits and like vulnerabilities that we found, you could have scanned the VIN number and essentially just unlock the car right there, you know? So if I'm a thief, no longer do I have to, you know, if you exploited this vulnerability, you could have just plugged it in, opened the car door, and it'd been completely fine. There were a lot of other companies that we found vulnerabilities in, but so for instance, like Mercedes-Benz, we were able to get access to a lot of like employee applications like internally. So servers where they would like, for instance, deploy code or manage code for the connected vehicles. And then for other companies like BMW and Rolls-Royce, we were able to actually compromise and get access to the dealer portals. So if you go to a BMW dealership, for instance, we had like full access to the systems that they use to, you know, if someone would go in and buy a car, we could access, you know, the sales information. We could have plugged in a VIN number and retrieved all the user information. And you could have also done other things, like for instance, like for BMW and Rolls-Royce, I think if I remember correctly, sorry, you have an email address that's tied to your account. We could have basically updated that and then taken over the accounts where you can do the same thing, like unlocking vehicles and starting vehicles. So pretty widespread. But yeah, exactly what Yoav talked about, where there's an API in between the car and the car app, and that's what we focused on, and that's where we found vulnerabilities.
Wow. Were there any you couldn't hack?
Yeah, so funny enough, we struggled a lot actually with like Tesla and Rivian. There were a few, maybe like Toyota, I think, as well, the sponsors, luckily enough. We struggled to find like the same vulnerabilities like at the API level for Tesla, Rivian. But one thing that was funny though is that we took a step back eventually when we couldn't hack these companies, and we thought about it from like a communications perspective. So Teslas and Rivians, they actually use a SIM card from AT&T. So we took a step back and we were able to actually compromise the AT&T SIM card management server. So we could essentially turn off the SIM cards for Teslas and Rivians and basically disable their internet or locate them. So that was kind of like a big thing. But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, Tesla, Rivian were the two that were like tricky.
Well, one last question, because there was an article in the New York Times recently about a angry ex-husband, an ex-DEI agent, who's able to track his wife through her car's Mercedes Me service app. Is that the kind of app we're talking about exploiting here? Is that what you can do with various cars and GPS apps? You could track somebody?
Yep, 100%. That was exactly like the level of access. It was pretty widespread where you either needed their email address or just the VIN number of the car, and you could get persistent location data or historical location data. So let's say I was an angry ex-husband and I knew my wife's email or VIN number of the car that we purchased and she moved away 3 months ago. All I'd have to do is plug in either the email or VIN number, and I'd be able to retrieve like the live location, unlock the car, start the car, and things like that.
Okay, I'm scared. Sebastian, so you've convinced us, or at least me, that computers are yet another vulnerability in the supply chain. Why don't we hear more about them? I've heard of various issues in the American Air Force with them getting bad processors, but other than a report from Fortune magazine that Chinese automakers were using recycled chips, we've heard very little about the car industry being affected by counterfeits.
So fundamentally, the industry doesn't really like to announce when they have problems. It's same as with cybersecurity incidences that happens. You don't hear about all of them, but you hear about them in other areas where companies have to report them. To give an example, one famous report is now 10 years ago when the US Armed Services Committee released a report on counterfeit parts and bogus parts in the US defense industry, and they had 1,800 cases of those that they knew about. And again, in more safety critical systems where you are required to report them, you have programs where companies are required to test for certain things and report them if they find them. In the automotive industry, we don't have any of that. There's no required reporting when companies have problems on the electronic side. So if there is an implant, if there is a counterfeit, like for example, exists for even some systems in the automotive domain, then there is no requirement to report this. And this definitely contributes to the fact that we don't know precisely how many of these problems are out there and how many companies are affected.
Do you have any idea in dollars or chips or anything how big the global counterfeit chip industry is, just roughly?
Yeah, so while I don't have it at the top of my head, ERAI, so ERAI is a US organization and company that provides a database that tracks counterfeit, and it only has information that where companies report findings to them. And to give an idea, in the 2022 report, they listed 768 suspect counterfeit cases for the year of 2022, ranging from simple components to full microcontrollers. Top brands that are listed in there are Texas Instruments, Xilinx, Analog Devices, and Altera. All of these companies have electronics where there have been demonstrated that counterfeit exists in the market from sellers, and they also list the market number on there, but I don't know the size of the number at the top of my head.
Thank you very much. And that, and as you said, that doesn't include industries that don't have to report or don't want to report on it. So the problem could be even larger than what you just said.
Absolutely. So what I mentioned there, that number is only counterfeit that were reported on a voluntary basis by companies. Now, if you have a company, an automotive OEM or a tier one, and they, for example, run into issues, for example, they run into an issue where there's a shortage of a particular chip, then they have very hard or very tough decisions to make. What do they do? If you cannot buy the chip because you can only buy it in a year from now, you might not be able to ship the product. There might be other sellers that sell you the chip, but how do you know that you can trust them, and how can you assess the electronics that they're going to give you so that they, for example, don't have a vulnerability or, in the worst case, a ransomware attack at the hardware level?
Yeah, I read an article and wrote about it. Fortune said that some Chinese automakers were actually calling Bosch directly and asking them if they could put if the car company could supply gray market chips so that Bosch would put them in traction and stability control systems that they would then sell back to the automaker. It was absolutely flabbergasting what happens. Okay, the next question is for all of you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add one thing in there to show you the magnitude of this. There are some chips that are very common in the automotive industry that are also very commonly counterfeited, like, for example, FTDI, USB to serial converters, and so on. You sometimes have a lead time of over a year if you want to buy them today until they get delivered. So if, as a supplier, you ever overlook the problem or overlook to actually secure your supply early, and then suddenly you learn that, oh, for a year you cannot manufacture, well, then you have a real problem.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is for all of you. So far, we've been talking about what has been done. And if I'm getting it right, most of the bad stuff has just been the regular stuff of criminals looking to do bad things to our computers for money, or good guys like Sam trying to reveal vulnerabilities before they happen. But what could happen if a decidedly more evil purpose were at hand? I'm not looking to sensationalize this discussion, but the discussion has always been either people playing down the vulnerabilities we have, oh, nothing can happen, usually the OEMs, or somebody trying to make a clickbait headline saying the world, we could blow up the world. What, you guys are all smart nicks. If somebody with your talent and who understands the systems and technologies involved, what could they do? What could you do if you really set your minds to it? Yoav, I'll start with you. Knowing all that you know about car system interconnectivity, what's your fear? What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, and maybe I'll give you a couple of examples of what happened during the Ukraine-Russia war, and maybe it can give us a little bit of sense, not specifically to automaker, but more to mobility service provider. So there was one case where Yandex, who is kind of the Russian Uber, I think, were hacked. So their application were hacked. And what they did, they sent all the taxi driver to the same location at the same time in Moscow. And the result was a massive traffic jams. So, and this happens, I think, September 2022, something like that. So it was published. So this just can give you a sense of an idea of what could happen, if these mobility service providers are actually being hacked. The second part was, again, during the Ukraine-Russia war, there were tractors, like agriculture vehicles, that were stolen from Ukraine to Russia. And according to the news, what happened is that the Ukraine were able to remotely hack these vehicles and brick them, which means that the Russian couldn't use them, only for spare parts. So now you can imagine what happens if someone wants to do that, but not for this purpose, maybe, attacking a fleet of agriculture vehicles or attacking a fleet of trucks or buses or whatever. This could be a severe impact, not only on the company itself, but also you can look at it as a critical infrastructure, like a very important infrastructure in the company that could be affected.
Will this get more critical, Yoav, as cars are able to 100% drive themselves?
Yeah, then that's for sure. And I think there is a Netflix movie called Leave the World Behind, something like this. It's a new Netflix movie, and there is a scene where you can see a lot of Tesla that are driving autonomously, and they're like bumping into each other. So this is a movie, right? Could it happen? Potentially it could happen. Think about software updates that are being done remotely to vehicles, and maybe someone put like a backdoor inside this software update, and now they can control the vehicle. So yeah, autonomous vehicles, it's like the requirement for cybersecurity would be much higher if you're an operator of autonomous vehicles with a fleet.
Okay, Sam, you're quite the expert in this. You've been hacking for a long time, and hacking cars for quite a while too. What if, with your understanding and your vast practical skills, you focused on one particularly vulnerable vehicle or attack vector and decided to go to the dark side? What's the worst thing you could do to or with a car remotely?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things we actually researched was a company called Spirion. What Spirion does, they provide like hardware devices that can go inside of cars. And if I'm a dealer, like let's say I run a dealership and someone's not making payments, what I can do is through Spirion, through one of their child companies, they offer a service where you can disable the starter of a vehicle. And when we hacked Spirion, we were able to get like full global access where you could essentially send commands to every single device to do kind of whatever you wanted. And what this basically meant for trucks, for instance, there's huge fleets of trucks that use this hardware. And I think from the data that we saw, it was like millions of trucks, that are moving agriculture and everything across like the US, Canada. And what you could have done is for every single one of those trucks, you could have remotely disabled the starter and then just completely basically turn the hardware into not functioning by updating the firmware on it. And then essentially the starters on these trucks would be disabled and you couldn't fix it via the software. So someone would have to manually go out for these, you know, I don't know how many, but millions of vehicles and like manually fix them. So from that perspective, like it's a really serious issue. And with Sebastian and Yoav, with like the knowledge of like a lot of like hardware vulnerabilities, with these connected cars, what you're essentially doing is these companies are giving trust between the actual connected vehicle component and a management interface, right? And if you're able to compromise anything along here, you're able to get access to vulnerabilities which could do potentially worse things depending on how the hardware is configured. So depending on how like the actual hardware of the vehicle corresponds to that software and that network interface, you could find at the worst case scenario a vulnerability to control driving components potentially. And that's kind of like where the worst case scenario comes from, is if an attacker found a vulnerability that can make its way remotely and then modify or interact with hardware at a level which can interrupt steering or cause like, various like CAN bus commands, it becomes a really, really big issue. So one, there's like the practical exploit of like disabling the hardware and then like stopping the starters of cars. And then two is like the potential future where if you have a fully self-driving car with like vulnerable hardware and vulnerable software, you could have that like end game worst vulnerability ever moment. But yeah, those are my two.
Well, I seem to have read something in all the details of everything that you hacked, is that you actually got into and were able to track an entire fleet of police vehicles. In other words, you could know where every police vehicle was at the time. That sounds like some kind of James Bond supervillain kind of thing. I mean, you could do some not nice things with that. Exactly what was that?
Yeah, so the same company, Spirion, one of their parent companies, was for like fleet management, right? And some of their customers included like whole police departments or ambulances or things like that. And you're able to actually compromise and get access to that fleet management system. So you could see where all the police cars were, and there were options to, for instance, dispatch police to locations. So if an attacker were able to compromise that component and use it maliciously, it's like you have visibility into like all these different like fleets, whether it's ambulances, police, and then also like potentially send commands to like dispatch them places. And to kind of clarify as well, all these vulnerabilities, we've worked with these vendors and they've fixed them for sake of the customers. But yeah, just that's that.
Well, we're really happy you're on our side. Okay, Sam, really, really happy. Okay. Sebastian, different technology, of course, but the same question. What could someone who planned this out do via a malicious computer chip supplied to an OEM automaker? So far, most of the cyber threats have been simple ransomware exploits that threaten to brick or destroy your data, which both Yoav and Sam have discussed. But could a deliberately sabotaged chip raise the ante? What are the possibilities with hardware?
Yes. So fundamentally, the possibility that you can do with manipulated hardware are bigger than what you can do with software. The impact that you can have on the system is bigger for the following reason. Often in safety critical systems, you have analog or basically hardware-based mechanisms in order to at least assure a certain level of safety for the system. And so even no matter how much the software wants to do a malicious action or a harmful action, the hardware might, or a hardware element might prevent this from doing this or from this happening. If you control systems at the hardware level, you have full control over everything. That means you can also compromise these type of safety mechanisms that might be in place as a last resort to catch what traditionally defects in software or malicious actions in software. So fundamentally, with a hardware attack, you can do anything that is physically possible with the particular hardware. Now, what keeps me up at night is, of course, that these type of hardware attacks and vulnerabilities can be staged. And they can be staged through the supply chain, where at a later point in time, whenever it is convenient for the malicious actor to then activate that particular staged vulnerability and exploit it. Now, again, it might be something as trivial as somebody wanting money and trying to extort money from an automotive company because they have implanted a particular chip in the supply chain and thereby can, for example, take control of the battery control module and potentially set it on fire. It could be as trivial as that, or it could be as bad as, for example, we have seen with fundamental flaws in the Intel processor or the AMD processor, where suddenly all systems are affected that use that particular processor and now become vulnerable to a particular attack.
Wow. So burning EVs is actually the less of the two problems. So that's that.
If you look at it from the impact and from the market cost, of course, if you compare this, for example, what happened with Intel, with Maelstrom and Spectre, then of course that might be the less of the two. Yes.
Wow. Okay. Yoav, there's another modern vulnerability to the automobile that few people are talking about, namely our budding EV infrastructure network. Unlike fueling your gas car, a charger is directly connected to an electric vehicle. It's communicating directly with that car. So what's our vulnerability here? Is it something the car owner has to worry about? Could the charging point itself be compromised? And could even the entire grid be compromised if someone undertook an attack vector through an electric vehicle?
Yeah, right. So I think first, if you fast forward 10 years, we're gonna have millions of EV charger and EV charging infrastructure all over the world, because this is where the world is going to. And when you look at an EV charger, you have a SIM card inside. So it's kind of an IoT device. It's connected to the cloud. And then you have a layer of APIs that we just discussed before that allows the consumer to charge his car in a public charging infrastructure. And so through these APIs, they can start and stop the charging, etc. So it's a connected device. Now let's take, and one hand, it's communicating with your car through a PLC protocol, power line communication protocol. So it communicates with your car on how much you need to charge, like what's your battery range, etc. On the other hand, it is connected into the grid. So you have an IoT device that has three layers: the device itself, the cloud that is connected, and a layer of APIs. As we heard before, there could be some vulnerabilities in the API layer, in the cloud layer, in the hardware. So there could be different level of vulnerabilities in the EV charging. And let's say that someone is able to hack this EV charger, and now they can run their own software on the computer that is running inside the EV charging, and they are running their own code. Could it affect also the connected car? Yes, because they are communicating and they have protocols, and there could be a vulnerability in the protocol between the EV charging and the vehicle. Could be also a vulnerability between the EV charging and the grid. Could be. Okay, so it means that this and again, if I'll take it back to the Ukraine-Russia war, we saw that in Moscow, all the way between St. Petersburg to Moscow, all the EV chargers were hacked. Actually, cursing Putin, that was done by Ukraine. So can it be hacked remotely? Yes, there are a few examples. We're seeing an increase hacking incidents in this space, and the EV charging CPOs need to take into account to start looking at cybersecurity and making sure that the whole layers of their infrastructure is secured.
Well, considering how unreliable some of the charging networks are here in Canada, I'm surprised they already haven't used it as an excuse. Sam, from reading how many cars you were able to hack into, I got the feeling that automobiles weren't the best protected products you ever attacked. How do they compare to other products you've been paid to pay surreptitious visits to?
Yeah, when we tested, for my background, like as a security researcher, we probably hack like hundreds, if not like 1,000, like different companies. We do all sorts of like different research. But with car companies, it felt like the infrastructure was so new. Like the transition between like having a car to like having a car that's a computer that's connected, like was really quick, you know. And when we actually like looked and audited each of the car apps and like the actual functionality and infrastructure, we found like it was like pretty like widespread vulnerable. Like there were lots of places where you could just take a VIN number, which is like semi-public, or take like an email address, like I said, and it's just like being able to pull information about people. One like kind of example that I always use that's I think is kind of particular with cars is like if I have like let's say a Facebook account or a Twitter account, I go and register and it's my own Facebook or Twitter account and it's mine forever, right? In the sense that I'm not giving access to anybody else. But if you buy a vehicle, like let's say you get like a 2020 Porsche or some, you know, some new car, you're going to sell that car to somebody else, or you're going to need to give access to your wife, your kid. And it basically creates this ecosystem where like ownership of vehicles is like a complicated process, and dealers need access to change ownership, and like other people need access to your car. So it creates not only like this new kind of technology, but it also creates this ecosystem where there's just so much going on that like it had, there's a lot more to chew on, and it felt like a lot more vulnerable compared to like other industries that we've looked at.
Offline, you mentioned that one of the issues and one of the reasons why it was so easy to hack into a lot of cars is quite a few companies use one basic platform. I think you mentioned something about Sirius. I only know them about radio. What's going on there? They all use basically the same hardware?
Yeah, so there was I had the same thing too, where I thought like Sirius XM, I thought of like radio, right? But it turns out that Sirius, or Sirius Connected Vehicle Company, I think it's a sub company of Sirius, actually built out a solution for, you know, like when I was like Honda like 10 years ago and I said like, hey, I want to build a mobile app. Sirius XM was like, hey, well, we already have the technology in the car that has like this radio connectivity. We could actually extend it and build like connected vehicles to use like via the mobile app. And they basically sold this solution. Sirius XM sold the solution to 5 or 6 different car companies, and you're able to actually compromise like one service. And by compromising that one service, you had like full unlock and remote like starting of like 5 or 6 different vehicle companies.
So if a theft network managed to get a hold of a tool that could do one, they could do them all.
Yeah, so that was like the funny thing. So like it's kind of tricky because like as like a researcher, you're like bound by a lot of like morality and efficacy. But what we could have done essentially is built out an app, and all you would have had to do is just go up, scan the VIN number of, again, like 80% of car brands, and you could have remotely unlocked the car or opened the trunk or started it, right? So like we talked about earlier, like Yoav says, there's like a lot of people are motivated by like money. Someone could just build out a tool and sell it to criminals where they could give like full unlock capabilities. You know, imagine like a $30 a month, like, oh, unlock 80% of cars. Like it's kind of a fun
Like a
product idea.
subscription basis. Oh Christ.
Exactly.
Oh, I thought no. Okay, don't put a black hat on. Sebastian, again, different technology, but the same goal. How are we currently protecting ourselves against bad chips? How well does it work? And could you please tell us about the SIL-GEO process? I think I'm saying that right. That you and some other scientists from Waterloo are working on. Can it prevent forged computer chips from getting into our cars? And Sebastian, like I said to Yoav, please, small words. Oh, he's offline.
I mute, yeah. So the fundamental challenge is that when you buy electronics, when you order something, did you get what you ordered and nothing else? And so when you build your car and you show that it's safe and secure, and then you build 100,000 of those, did the 100,000 chips that you got later on, are they the same, and are the electronics the same as the one that you had originally? And what we look at in our research is how can we assess the electronics to demonstrate that the electronics that you have, that you receive from your tier 1, that you receive from your tier 2, are actually the electronics that they claim them to be, and that they are similar to what you had and received before. And the specific approach that we use for this is that we use physics to assess the electronics, and thereby we provide what we call physics-based cybersecurity. And the big advantage of using physics over using software and logic is that you cannot really break the laws of physics, no matter how much money you throw at the particular problem. If you modify something on the electronics, whether that is an implant, whether that is a counterfeit, even a recycled chip that is old and basically has been damaged during the recycling process, the physical properties of this chip will be different than the one and the electronics that you approved before. And so by using physics at the hardware layer, we can identify and can detect problems and can detect implants, recycled chips, counterfeits, and so on.
If I understand it right, I love this line in your paper. It basically said it's like standing at a cave and yelling into the cave, and then making sure the echo that comes back completely replicates your the original input. Is that roughly what you're doing? Put an electrical signal in and then checking what comes out. Is that correct?
Without going into too technical detail there, I often use that analogy because it is similar to what we do, and it explains it very well what the physics aspect is of it. Imagine you stand in front of a cave and you shout into the cave, back comes an echo. If somebody modifies something in the cave, either maliciously because they add an implant, or non-maliciously because even if it's a defect, then the echo that comes back from this cave will be different. You cannot hide this by, for example, which you could do in software. And so by comparing the echoes from the cave, we can tell you whether what you have is a chip that is original and authentic, or whether what you have is a chip that is modified and tampered, and thereby you shouldn't use it.
Good luck on this. Thank you very much. We got about 10 minutes, guys, so we're going to keep this short. I had written a question about AI, but one of the viewers watching now, I think it says his name's Ross, and says he's an expert in this field. I suspect he might be a retired cohort of Sebastian from the University of Waterloo, but he's asking about AI. And so, Yoav, does the ongoing, I'm reading it from here, from a paper, does the ongoing exponential adoption of artificial intelligence make cybersecurity more complex or challenging? Or will AI add a level of security that could ultimately simplify the security concerns of data generated by passenger vehicles? Yeah. Bad or good, AI?
Yeah, bad and good, I would say. But I think even more good than bad, because I think AI is disrupting the entire industry in different domains, different technologies, as well as in the cybersecurity. What we are doing with AI is Upstream is also operating SOC, Security Operations Center. So think about kind of a command and control room, 24/7, that monitoring, detecting, investigating incidents and responding. And think about shifts. People are working in shift, and they're doing kind of most of the same procedures when they're investigating different type of alerts in the system. So what we've built with AI is the ability for them to become much more efficient. So they can use AI, ask questions, and help them during the investigation, so they can detect and get into the root cause analysis quicker, so they can respond to these threats quicker. So we use AI mainly to become like more efficient, kind of an assistant for the analyst. In the future, we're going to do more and more with AI. I think it's doing very good things to the world, and we're going to continue working on it.
So some good news out of AI. That's a little bit different than what
I focused only on the good part.
Okay, Sam, most important question. I sit you in a room with somebody like Yoav. Oh, I'm assuming he's been listening intently. Or maybe the CEO or chief technical officer of a large automaker. What is the number one thing, the most important thing of advice you would give them?
I think just like in kind of the whole security ecosystem, one thing with like automakers that we kind of noticed is that they're very like kind of closed off, and they didn't really seem to want like outside help from security. So it's kind of a lot of times we'd report a vulnerability and it would take a long time to get in touch with the actual automaker. So like I think creating an ecosystem with kind of like openness and kind of instead of having like these closed off apps that like they're obfuscated and it takes a long time to like try to understand what they do, instead of trying to create and build like standards for car security and standards for APIs that connect with the vehicle, because if every single automaker is rolling their own solution and like creating a new product and having to build security and like integrate everything, it kind of creates like this roundabout thing where there's more and more potential vulnerabilities, and it's more and more like harder and harder to secure each and every individual one. So I think the thing that I would focus on is creating not necessarily a standard, but just kind of an air of openness, I guess I would say.
I think basically what you're saying is listen to you. Okay. Yeah. And I would agree with you. So don't try to be too humble. Sebastian, you've talked about the need for something called zero trust. That sounds pretty ominous, though possibly necessary. What is it, and how does it make our cars safer?
Yeah. So fundamentally, zero trust is a very established concept in cybersecurity, and is very established already in the standard IT world for computers and networking. It basically means that you should not trust anyone by default. And what we are currently looking at is how to apply this concept of zero trust to the supply chain. Because even there, you should not trust anyone by default. To give you an idea, the common model of operations right now is that when you have a supplier, you basically first vet the supplier, and after you vetted the supplier, anything that the supplier does is trusted. So that means you initially send a questionnaire, and then they fill out the right checkboxes everywhere that they are safe and secure. And then afterwards, anything they give you is also deemed to be good and safe and secure. And that, of course, is not a good mechanism, because as we have seen in the documented cases of L3 display systems, where the first 20 or so pieces of electronics that they received and that they vetted were all handpicked and all good, and the next 6,000 that they received were all fakes. And so you can clearly see that this concept of blindly trusting or trusting a supplier does not really work. And we are looking into zero trust supply chain, how an automotive OEM can build up mechanisms to trust the suppliers and have a mechanism to also check on this.
Perfection. We have time for about 1 minute of another question. Yoav, here in North America, there's a lot of discussion of right to repair for both the person owning the car and also access to the information to repair cars for mechanics and aftermarket people. On the other hand, automakers possibly rightly say that the more people that gain access to the codes to build the car, the less secure that information goes. Is that a balance that's going to be difficult in the future? Is it true that the more people have access, the less secure the system is?
Yeah, I think as a general statement, this is a right statement. I think when things are very close and no one has access, or very few people have access to something, it also reduces the risk. And when you open some of the systems, some of the data that you have, some of the capabilities that were only few people had access to everyone, it of course also introduces risk. The risk could be around if you have vulnerabilities in the area you open, or you allow more people to try and find these vulnerabilities, it's also introduces risk. So as a general statement, it will or it is going to introduce new risks.
Okay, I'm looking at the clock. It says 11:59. I got to wrap this up. That's all the time we have for today. My first order of business is to thank everybody in the audience who wrote in questions today. All the questions were fantastic. I've got a few more here. I'd love to get to them. I hope to answer some of them in the next column. And really, most of all, of course, I have to say thank you to my most excellent panel of guests. Sam Curry of Yuga Labs, Yoav Levy of Upstream Security, and Professor Sebastian Fischmeister of the University of Waterloo. I've got to thank you guys. Honestly, at least from my case, this might be the most interesting of the webinars I've done so far. I'm just fascinated. I'm absolutely overjoyed to have you on the program. And lastly, I'd just like to thanks again to Toyota for sponsoring this discourse, especially since, as I said, this one is possibly one of our best. Thank you all for attending.